Imagine stepping into a courtroom where everyone, judge, attorneys, even the gallery, believes you're already beaten. Now, picture turning that very skepticism into a masterstroke that unmasks a massive fraud. What if the underdog not only wins but changes the very rules of the game? Stay with me, because the story about Ethan Carter is one you won't soon forget. Ethan Carter arrived at the courthouse with nothing but unyielding determination and a single, burning mission: to save his grandmother's home from falling prey to a ruthless corporate foreclosure. His suit was slightly worn, his tie a bit askew, but his eyes held a spark of defiance that no one in that room could ignore. Ethan was no lawyer by trade, he was simply a man driven by love and a fierce desire to protect his family legacy. As he stepped forward, his measured gait and steady posture belied the undercurrent of resolve that would soon electrify the courtroom. Judge Vincent Montgomery, a man known for his unyielding adherence to the law and his discerning eye for detail, peered over his glasses with an expression that was hard to read, at once amused and skeptical. "Mr. Carter, representing yourself?" the judge inquired, his tone laced with an undercurrent of disbelief. A few chuckles rippled from the back of the room, particularly from the side where the corporate legal team sat. Among them was Damian Clark, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for bulldozing his opponents without a second thought. Clad in an immaculate suit and exuding self-assurance, Damian adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate precision, as if to emphasize that he was in his element, the courtroom, where victory was routine and challengers were mere distractions. Ethan met Judge Montgomery's gaze without flinching. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied calmly, his voice steady as the room hushed in anticipation. The courtroom had already cast him aside, dismissed him as a naive, overzealous individual. But Ethan was not there for pity, he was there to expose a colossal legal deception. "Very well," Judge Montgomery said as he flipped through a thick file of case documents. "This is a property dispute, correct? A foreclosure challenge?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir. It's about my grandmother's home." With barely a glance in his direction, the judge continued, "And you believe you can argue this case against a seasoned attorney like Mr. Clark?" "Not just believe, Your Honor, I know what I've uncovered," Ethan stated firmly. There was a brief moment of silence, punctuated only by the murmurs of the corporate side. The gallery, accustomed to hearing predictable, rehearsed arguments from high-powered lawyers, now sensed something different, a palpable tension of impending truth. Judge Montgomery sighed as he allowed the proceedings to continue. "Let us proceed." But Ethan had no intention of delivering a mere argument. He was there to dismantle a fraudulent scheme piece by piece. While Damian Clark was already exuding confidence, preparing his opening statement with practiced ease, Ethan's eyes shone with the quiet intensity of someone who had already studied every loophole and every statute used by banks and corporations to strip away the homes of the vulnerable. Damian Clark rose to his feet with an air of assured authority. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, gesturing subtly toward Ethan without even turning his head, "this case is straightforward. We have before us a man who stubbornly refuses to accept reality. The property in question was legally foreclosed upon by my client, and the procedures followed every legal protocol." His voice, smooth and confident, carried the weight of countless similar cases. "This isn't a matter of sentiment, it's a matter of contracts, deadlines, and obligations. My client adhered to the law to the letter." A slow, calculated pause followed his statement. "I do sympathize with anyone who loses their home," Damian added, a slight shrug punctuating his words. "But emotional pain does not override legal responsibility. The numbers, the facts, they are indisputable." With that, he returned to his seat, hands folded, as if he were already certain the matter was settled. Ethan, however, was undeterred. Rising from his seat, he captured the attention of not only Judge Montgomery but everyone in the courtroom. "Your Honor," he began, his tone calm but laced with determination, "Mr. Clark is correct in asserting that the law is clear. But the true question is, does his client actually follow that law?" A ripple of murmurs filled the room. The word fraud seemed to hang in the air, electrifying every listener with a sense of impending revelation. Judge Montgomery's eyes narrowed slightly as he leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "Proceed, Mr. Carter," he said. Ethan took a measured breath and continued, "Over the past 6 months, I've meticulously reviewed every case, every statute, every loophole exploited by banks and corporate entities to seize homes from families. And what I discovered changes everything." At that moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. Damian Clark's confident smirk faltered, replaced by a fleeting look of concern. "Before I continue," Ethan interjected, "I request an official order for full discovery." The judge's gaze intensified as he studied the man who had dared to challenge the established order. "And on what grounds?" he asked. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe that the foreclosure on my grandmother's home was executed on the basis of forged documents," Ethan asserted, holding up 2 identical copies of the original mortgage agreement. "Observe closely. Here are 2 versions of the same document, one from the initial filing and another from a later modification. Notice the signatures. One clearly differs from the other." Judge Montgomery leaned in, his expression morphing from mild skepticism to keen interest as he scrutinized the papers. "Mr. Carter, can you explain these discrepancies?" he asked, his tone now more authoritative. "Certainly, Your Honor," Ethan replied, stepping forward confidently. "I recognize my grandmother's signature on the first copy. But the signature on the second document is unmistakably not hers. It was affixed just 1 day after she was admitted to the hospital following a severe stroke." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even members of the jury leaned in, their eyes fixed on the documents that challenged the very legitimacy of the foreclosure. Damian Clark's jaw tightened as he attempted to regain control of the situation. "That is preposterous," he murmured, his voice tense. "Signatures can vary over time due to numerous factors." Ethan, however, was undaunted. "Perhaps," he countered, "but the timing and context of that signature are highly suspicious. Furthermore, it is crucial to note that the mortgage was transferred between lenders not once, but 3 times before it reached the current holder. And yet, during these transfers, proper endorsement official documentation attesting to the transfer of the mortgage was conspicuously absent in the final transaction." Judge Montgomery's brow furrowed as he pored over another set of documents Ethan produced. "Explain, Mr. Carter," he demanded, "what do you mean by absence of endorsement?" "Your Honor," Ethan explained, "each time the mortgage changed hands, there should have been a formal endorsement to document the transaction. In this case, however, the last transfer is missing that critical endorsement. Without it, the lender never actually held the legal right to foreclose on my grandmother's property. In essence, the bank never truly owned the loan." A heavy silence enveloped the room. The gravity of Ethan's revelation was impossible to ignore. It was as though the very foundation of the case was crumbling beneath the weight of indisputable evidence. Damian Clark, his earlier bravado now replaced with visible agitation, attempted to interject. "Your Honor, these documents do not alter the fact that the foreclosure was conducted in accordance with legal procedures." Before he could elaborate further, Ethan pressed on, his voice rising with controlled intensity. "Your Honor, if the bank's foreclosure is to be considered legitimate, then every single piece of documentation must be above reproach. And here we see a glaring inconsistency. I now move to call a critical witness, a notary public who can shed light on the irregularities of the document in question. At that moment, the courtroom door creaked open, and a woman stepped forward, a notary public by the name of Olivia Turner. She appeared visibly nervous as she approached the stand, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her glasses. Judge Montgomery nodded gravely at her arrival. "State your full name and occupation for the record," he requested. Clearing her throat, Olivia replied, "My name is Olivia Turner, and I am a licensed notary public." Ethan leaned forward, his tone direct and probing. "Ms. Turner, do you recall notarizing the mortgage modification for my grandmother, Mrs. Evelyn Carter?" Olivia hesitated, glancing briefly at Damian Clark before replying, "Yes, I do remember." "Were you present when Mrs. Carter signed the document?" Ethan asked, his gaze unwavering. Another pause ensued before Olivia reluctantly admitted, "No, I was not present. I was handed the paperwork by a bank representative, and I was told that the document had already been signed. My only task was to affix my notary seal." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Montgomery's eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward, addressing both Olivia and Damian. "Ms. Turner, do you understand the legal implications of notarizing a document without personally verifying the signature?" Olivia's voice, barely above a whisper, responded, "I was not aware at the time of the proper protocol, Your Honor." At that, Damian Clark's composure visibly cracked as he scrambled to counter the mounting evidence. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay," he declared, his voice edged with desperation. But Judge Montgomery swiftly overrode the objection. "Overruled," he stated firmly, silencing Damian and turning his attention back to the undeniable facts before him. Ethan then recapped his argument, his tone a mixture of controlled passion and unyielding resolve. "Your Honor, with the forged signature and the missing endorsements, it is evident that my grandmother's foreclosure was executed through fraudulent means. The documents you have seen, coupled with Ms. Turner's testimony, clearly show that the legal process was not properly followed. I respectfully move for the foreclosure to be declared null and void, and for my grandmother's home to be returned to our family immediately." For a long, excruciating moment, the courtroom was engulfed in silence. Judge Montgomery tapped his gavel slowly, the sound echoing through the room as everyone awaited his ruling. Finally, with a measured tone that conveyed both authority and finality, he declared, "Based on the evidence presented and the testimony provided, I rule in favor of the defendant. The foreclosure is hereby declared void, and the property shall be returned to its rightful owner forthwith." A collective murmur of disbelief and relief swept over the courtroom. Ethan exhaled deeply, as if a lifetime of worry had been lifted in that instant. His fight was far from about personal vengeance, it was about justice, a principle that held more value than any sum of money or corporate advantage. The look in his eyes was not one of triumph over an adversary, but rather a profound satisfaction that truth had ultimately prevailed. As the session concluded, Ethan stepped outside the courthouse. The late afternoon sun cast long, dramatic shadows on the steps, creating a moment of serene reflection amid the chaos of the courtroom battle. He paused, taking a deep, grounding breath, his mind replaying every moment of the fight he had just waged. The victory was not only his own but belonged to every individual who had ever felt powerless against an overwhelming system. His resolve had transformed into a statement: power does not reside solely with those who hold money and titles, it belongs to anyone who refuses to surrender in the face of injustice. In the wake of the ruling, whispers spread among those gathered outside. Some marveled at the audacity of a man who had challenged a corporate giant, while others discussed the implications of such a victory for future cases. Even as he walked slowly away from the courthouse, his eyes remained alert, as though already scouting for the next injustice to confront. In that defining moment, Ethan Carter had not only reclaimed his grandmother's home belonging to Mrs. Evelyn Carter but had also ignited a spark of hope for anyone daring to stand up against corrupt practices. Later that day, as reporters and onlookers buzzed with speculation, Judge Montgomery himself approached Ethan on the courthouse steps. His earlier skepticism had transformed into a grudging respect. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, his tone measured and thoughtful, "you surprised me in court today." Ethan turned to face him, meeting his gaze squarely. "Thank you, Your Honor," he replied simply. The judge paused for a moment, then added, "Have you ever considered studying law? You certainly have a knack for it." A quiet chuckle escaped Ethan. "Law school isn't really on my radar, Your Honor," he admitted, a warm smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Judge Montgomery's smirk was subtle but sincere as he offered a parting remark, "Well, maybe it's time to reconsider. There's a talent for making those who stand in your way squirm." With that, the judge turned and disappeared into the throng of courthouse visitors, leaving Ethan to ponder the unexpected compliment. As Ethan walked away, his mind was abuzz with plans for the future. His journey had only just begun. What started as a personal crusade to save his grandmother's home had evolved into a broader mission of fight against a system that treated human lives as mere numbers on a balance sheet. With each step, Ethan felt an empowering mix of resolve and responsibility. He understood that every victory, no matter how small it might seem, was a blow against the corrupt forces that sought to silence the underdog. Ethan's story soon spread beyond the walls of that courthouse, resonating with ordinary people across the country. His courage in the face of overwhelming odds became a beacon for those who had long felt marginalized and voiceless. Communities rallied behind him, inspired by the idea that justice was attainable when one dared to challenge the status quo. In countless neighborhoods and on social media platforms, his name became synonymous with hope and the relentless pursuit of fairness. He made no grand proclamations or promises of sweeping reform. Instead, he spoke plainly and directly with his audience. "This isn't just about one foreclosure or one courtroom battle," Ethan declared during one of his public addresses. "It's about ensuring that every person has the right to protect what they hold dear, that no one is forced to surrender their home or their dignity to the cold, unfeeling gears of a profit-driven machine." His words, delivered with an authenticity that touched the hearts of many, echoed far beyond the courtroom walls. In the weeks that followed, local media outlets and online news platforms began to chronicle his story in detail. Interviews, op-eds, and community meetings all bore witness to the profound impact of his legal victory. People began to see that sometimes, the most unassuming individuals could spark monumental change simply by refusing to back down. His actions were a reminder that the law, when wielded with integrity and passion, could be a powerful tool in the hands of anyone willing to fight for justice. Throughout it all, Ethan maintained his focus on the real issue at hand, the unethical practices that allowed large financial institutions to prey on the vulnerable. In a series of interviews, he highlighted the alarming discrepancies in mortgage documents, the absence of proper endorsements in multiple foreclosure cases, and the disturbing ease with which fraudulent paperwork could be passed off as legitimate. "When we allow corporations to operate in secrecy and shield themselves behind layers of bureaucracy," he explained, "we leave countless families exposed to exploitation and injustice." His pointed critique of the system resonated with many who had experienced similar losses, and his determination fueled calls for greater transparency and reform in the financial sector. One particular community forum became a turning point in Ethan's crusade. Invited to speak at a town hall meeting in a small Midwestern town, he addressed an audience that was all too familiar with the devastating effects of corporate greed. "I stand before you as a testament to what happens when we dare to challenge the system," he told the gathering, his voice echoing with conviction. "We must hold those in power accountable for every misstep, every instance where the law is twisted to serve profit instead of protecting people." The forum was filled with nods of agreement, and many left with a renewed sense of purpose, a belief that ordinary citizens, armed with knowledge and courage, could indeed make a difference. Back in the courtroom where it all began, Damian Clark's earlier confidence had been irrevocably shaken. His attempts to dismiss the discrepancies in the documents and the notary's testimony had ultimately crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. In private discussions later that day, members of his legal team admitted that they had underestimated Ethan Carter, a mistake that had cost them dearly. For Clark, the defeat was not merely a setback in a single case, it was a stark reminder that arrogance and complacency could blind even the most seasoned professionals to the truth. Ethan's battle had also ignited discussions among legal experts and academics, who debated the broader implications of his case. Some heralded it as a watershed moment, a turning point that could potentially inspire a wave of reforms aimed at curbing abusive foreclosure practices. Law professors began to reference his case in lectures about consumer rights and legal ethics, pointing out how a determined individual could force even the most entrenched systems to answer for their actions. "This is not just a victory for one man," one legal analyst remarked in a televised panel discussion. "It is a victory for every homeowner, every family that has ever felt powerless against a faceless corporate giant." Yet, amidst all the praise and analysis, Ethan remained grounded. He never allowed the accolades to distract him from his mission. In a heartfelt conversation with a local journalist, he stated, "I didn't set out to become a hero. I set out to save my grandmother's home because I believed it was right. If my fight can serve as a catalyst for change and protect others from similar injustice, then that is more than enough reward." His humility and unwavering commitment to justice continued to inspire many who had followed his journey from the very beginning. As the days turned into weeks, the ripple effect of his courtroom triumph began to manifest in unexpected ways. Community leaders organized workshops and seminars to educate homeowners about their rights. Consumer advocacy groups seized the momentum to launch campaigns aimed at exposing and rectifying unethical foreclosure practices. And on social media, a groundswell of support emerged, with countless people sharing their own stories of struggle and hope in the face of overwhelming odds. In one particularly moving video interview that later went viral, Ethan spoke candidly about the personal toll of the battle. "There were moments," he confessed, "when I questioned if I had the strength to go on. When I saw the dismissive looks, the quiet laughter, I almost gave in. But every time I thought of my grandmother's warm smile, of the memories we shared in that old house, I knew I couldn't let it go without a fight." His voice resonated with every word, connecting with audiences who had experienced similar battles in their lives. It was a raw, honest moment that underscored the emotional weight behind every legal document and every signature that had been forged. In the midst of all the chaos and newfound attention, one thing remained constant: Ethan's relentless pursuit of truth and justice. His courtroom victory was not the end but the beginning of a larger movement, a movement that questioned long-held assumptions about power, accountability, and the sanctity of one's home. Every step he took was a defiant reminder that the system was not infallible and that even the most unlikely of challengers could shine a light on hidden injustices. As the sun set on the day of the ruling, Ethan stood outside the courthouse, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the heated debates that had just taken place. He gazed upward at the sky, contemplating the journey ahead. The victory was sweet, but he knew that the fight against corruption was an ongoing battle, one that required courage, vigilance, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. "This is only the beginning," he murmured to himself, a quiet promise that resonated with the determination of a man who had just defied the odds. Before he left, a small group of supporters gathered around him, each person eager to express their gratitude and admiration. Among them was a young woman who had recently lost her home to a similar foreclosure scheme. "You gave me hope," she said softly, her eyes glistening with tears. "I never thought someone like me could fight back and win." Ethan's response was simple yet profound. "We're all in this together. Justice isn't reserved for the powerful, it belongs to each and every one of us who dares to stand up and fight." In that moment, the true power of Ethan Carter's journey became clear. It wasn't merely about saving a building or reclaiming property, it was about restoring faith in a system that too often overlooked the little guy. It was a rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt marginalized, a vivid illustration that determination and truth could indeed topple even the most entrenched institutions. The story of Ethan Carter reverberated far beyond the courthouse, reaching into communities that had long been silenced by systemic injustice. It sparked debates in living rooms, inspired countless social media posts, and became a beacon of hope for those battling the odds. His unyielding stand against corporate malpractice reminded everyone that when you refuse to back down, you not only win a legal battle, you redefine the very essence of justice. Now, as we reflect on this remarkable journey, a battle fought not with the weapons of wealth or privilege, but with the force of truth and unwavering determination, I ask you, what would you do if you found yourself up against a system that seemed all but unbeatable? Could you find the courage to stand up and challenge the status quo, knowing that the truth might just set you free? Stay tuned for our next video, where we explore more stories of individuals who dared to challenge the norm and turn the tide in their favor. What hidden injustices lie waiting to be uncovered in your own community? How far would you go to protect what is rightfully yours? The conversation is just beginning, and your voice matters. What do you think? Are you ready to join the fight for justice? So, as we wrap up Ethan Carter's unforgettable journey, I leave you with this question: what would you risk to reclaim what is rightfully yours? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that challenge the status quo. The next chapter is coming. Will you be a part of it? This story is a work of creative transformation, inspired by real events yet reimagined to resonate with those who dare to challenge injustice. If you found this narrative as gripping and thought-provoking as we intended, hit that subscribe button and join our community, where every voice is empowered and every fight for justice counts. Thank you for watching, and remember, true power belongs to those who never back down.